Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming tonight. The Springfield-Greene County Library is very pleased to be bringing Chris Crutcher and Ellen Hopkins to Springfield as part of its One Read, an annual celebration of books, literacy, and community. This year's celebration focused on Lois Lowry's The Giver. Those of you who have read this outstanding title and have heard Miss Lowry speak know that the book focuses on several themes, not least of which is individuality, the freedom to make choices, and maintaining one's integrity in dealing with the outcome of one's choices. The two authors you'll be hearing tonight incorporate many of these same themes into their works for teens and have frequently fought censors for their right to do so. Before I introduce them, I do want to tell you that as part of the One Read every year, we make every attempt to offer a contest to area schools to host the authors for their audiences, for their students that are going to those schools. This year, Jarrett Middle School was one of the schools that wanted a visit from Chris Crutcher. As part of the work that they did to bring Mr. Crutcher to their school, they hosted a bookmark contest, and the winning bookmarks are out in the concourse in the display cabinet for you to see. And they also hosted a penny war among the 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade classes. And the result of that penny war was that they raised $750 for the local Harmony House. So a big, big shout out. So we had 500 of those students in attendance at Jarrett Middle School today to hear Mr. Crutcher, and nobody could be prouder. And as Mr. Crutcher said, what they did, it was just gold. Listed on the American Library Association's most frequently challenged list, just behind Mark Twain, Chris Crutcher is the author of 14 award-winning books for teens. His descriptive style combines humor, reality, and tragedy, using authentic language and believable characters who want their voices heard. Mr. Crutcher provides that for them. His books include themes of friendship, our connection to others, and taking responsibility for our own lives. In 2000, Mr. Crutcher earned the Margaret A. Edwards Award, which is bestowed by the American Library Association on an author for his significant and lasting contribution to young adult literature. It recognizes an author's work in helping adolescents become aware of themselves and addressing questions about their role and importance in relationships, society, and in the world. In addition to this Lifetime Achievement Award, Chris has also been honored with the Intellectual Freedom Awards from both the National Council of Teachers of English and the National Coalition Against Censorship. With a signature style, Ellen Hopkins shares realistic, gritty stories for her readers that ring true to life. At once eloquent and stark, Miss Hopkins' novels and verse share stories of teens struggling with drug addiction, abuse, and mental illness. She regularly receives comments from readers that must be, at the same time, the highest yet the most heartbreaking praise. You are the only one who has ever understood me. I feel that you know me. She is a novelist who is committed to making a difference with her writing. Growing up in California, Ellen started writing as soon as she knew what words and print were, creating her first poem at age 9. From there, she's gone on to become a New York Times best-selling author of 11 novels for teens, 2 adult novels, and has written more than 20 books of nonfiction for children. Her book, Burned, was a National Book Award nominee in 2006, and Crank won the Missouri Association for School Librarians Gateway Teen Readers' Choice Award in 2007. Tonight's presentation by these authors has been made possible by funding provided by the Friends of the Library and the Library Foundation. We're going to begin our evening with Ellen, and Chris will follow with his presentation. So please welcome Ellen Hopkins.
prove to the world that you guys actually can. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3, and I'll be on Instagram later. Yay. Awesome. Yes. Yay. All right. So how many of you guys have read one or more of my books? I love you. That is so awesome. Yay. I'm actually going to start with a little reading from Crank for those of you who might not have read this book. This book, which is my first novel, inspired by my own daughter's story of meth addiction, and it's gone on to, it's like you write a book and it's like, God, I hope somebody reads it. And then it's like this book goes on and to have touched as many lives as this book specifically has touched has made pretty much the whole journey worthwhile. So I'm going to read a little bit from Crank. Flirting with the monster. Life was good before I met the monster. After life was great, at least for a little while. So you want to know all about me, who I am, what chance meeting of brush and canvas painted the face you see, what made me despise the girl in the mirror enough to transform her, turn her into a stranger, only not. So you want to hear the whole story, why I swerved off the high road, hard left to nowhere, recklessly indifferent to those coughing my dust, picked up speed, no limits, no top end, just a high velocity rush to madness. Alone, everything changes. Some might call it distorted reality, but it's exactly the place I need to be. No mom, Marie, ever more distant in her midlife quest for fame. No stepfather, Scott, stern and heavy-handed with unattainable expectations. No big sister, Lee, caught up in a tempest of uncertain sexuality. No little brother, Jake, spoiled and shameless in his thievery of my niche. Alone, there is only the person inside. I've grown to like her better than the stuck-up husk of me. She's not quite silent, shouts obscenities just because they roll so well off the tongue. Not quite straight A, but talented in oh so many enviable ways. Not quite sanitary, farts with gusto, picks her nose, spits like a guy, not quite sane. Sometimes, to tell you the truth, even I wonder about her. Alone, there is no perfect daughter, no gifted high school junior, no Christina Georgia Snow. There is only Bree. I'm gonna grab a water here. So, my journey here started like way back when, as ancient. I was adopted as a baby, and so kind of, I guess maybe even the kind of my drive to writing about marginalized people might have started even as far back as that. To be adopted and to grow up knowing you're adopted is both good and bad, because you feel like, well, somebody didn't want me. And I remember I eventually did meet my real mother, my birth mother, who had me when she was 16 in the 50s, so it made more sense to adopt me out. And an interesting thing for you in meeting her, she has written poetry her entire life and used to write scripts for Walt Disney. And so our first connection was I wrote her a poem about what it felt like to be left behind, and she wrote me a poem back about what it was like to leave a baby. So that was our first connection, and that's a very deep connection that we share. My parents that adopted me were older. My mom was 42, my dad was 72 when he adopted me. Now to put that in some perspective for you, he was born in 1883. He was a son of, I know, it was an unusual childhood, right? He was the son of German immigrants into San Francisco, built a 6th grade education into a thriving steel company that made a lot of money during World War II. So he defined self-made man, came from very poor circumstances and built himself into a small fortune, which eventually he wanted to share with children, so he adopted my little brother and I later in life. Grew up in Palm Springs, California. It's very hot there. Especially in the summer. I mean, it's like 125 hot in the summer. So we would summer at Lake Tahoe or Northern California. But in the neighborhood I grew up in, it was a pretty affluent neighborhood. There were sports stars and movie stars. And I used to have a list, and then I figured out most of you guys weren't even born when they were sports stars and movie stars. And so, but I know you guys have all heard of Elvis. I did meet Elvis Presley. He lived up around the corner in a big wall compound, and my little brother was selling Scoutorama tickets, you know, Cub Scout tickets. And so we were like ringing random doorbells in the neighborhood, and Elvis Presley's gates were open, and we're like, walk up to his door and rang the doorbell, and he answered in his boxers. I saw Elvis Presley in his underwear. It was not attractive. He did, however, buy every single one of those tickets. He was a very nice man. So, growing up, my mother was the one that loved books. And she read to my little brother and me every day until finally I go, you know, Mother, I can really handle this on my own. But she loved classic literature and poetry. And I was probably like the first 5-year-old that could quote Dickens, you know. But she loved that. And so I always had this affinity with words and language and books. And she never censored what I read, ever. Which probably explains why I use the F-bomb sometimes. Anyway, we'll leave that reference there. I did go to a little private school with, like my 4th grade through 8th grade class was almost the same 13 of us for that whole 4 years. We had like 1 or 2 that came in or out or whatever. So I grew up in a kind of very insulated place. For high school, my 8th grade summer, we moved to the Santa Ynez Valley. It's inland from Santa Barbara, California. So I moved from knowing everybody to knowing nobody. So I started high school knowing nobody. Have you guys ever started school where you knew nobody? Not very comfortable. So that puts you on the edges, you know, marginalizes you. You're trying to make friends and push your way in. I will tell you, the cheerleaders were never my best friends. I got them back. Like I got a drug addict cheerleader in one of my books. We get our revenge where we can. Sometimes it takes years, but we get our revenge where we can. So then I went on to go to college in Santa Barbara at UCSB, studied journalism. If you have read Crank, you know I haven't. Well, he just passed away, but had an ex-husband who I met in college, dropped out of school to get married, have a couple of kids. So I was a young mom, had my first kid at 20. And I kind of followed my father's footsteps into entrepreneurship. So in my early 20s, I had 2 businesses. One was a catering service, and one was a video store. Do you guys remember video stores? Yeah. I know it's starting to be ancient history, but so this was actually prior to like it become. See, I was always kind of early to technology. I could see that video was going to become a big thing, so I created this little video store, which I later got bigger and bigger, and I sold out to Hollywood Video when I met my current husband. Wait, there's an interim relationship I have to mention, who is the father of my younger daughter, Kelly. So in the book, in Crank, I have an older daughter who's gay and a younger son. In real life, it's an older son who's gay and a younger daughter. So I flipped them in writing the book to kind of give a little bit of space to the real players. But so met my husband, my ex-husband. I'm running these businesses and there's money coming in, but I didn't have money in the bank to like buy diapers for my babies. So I started looking at what was going on, and I found out that my ex-husband was using cocaine, and I gave him the choice, cocaine, family, and he chose cocaine. I moved to Albuquerque to get high, and did continue to get high there until he just passed away about 3 months ago because of his drug use and the things that he's been doing. So, so now I'm a young mom raising 2 little kids, running a couple businesses. There's a rebound relationship in there, who's the father of my younger daughter, Kelly, very abusive person. So when I write abuse, it is something I have lived. Here's the deal. I'm gonna say girls because it's mostly for girls, but it happens to boys too. I'm not being sexist here. If you find yourself in an abusive relationship, you can't fix it. You can't change them. Run. Seriously, run. So eventually I ran. with 3 children, and eventually I met Mr. Mostly Right, because we've been together now 30 years. And anybody who's been together with somebody for 30 years will tell you there are days. Yeah. Moved to Lake Tahoe, and at that time I had sold my businesses, so I had some money coming in, and I decided, okay, if I'm ever going to be a writer, because at the back of my mind, in all those years when I wasn't writing for money, I was writing. I had drawers full of yellow legal pads with short stories and poetry and essays, and I was writing. And so we moved to Tahoe, and my husband, he was in radio at the time, so he goes to work for a radio station up there. I go, so what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And I said, I'm a writer. And he's like, you're a what? I don't think so. And I said, yes, I am. Watch me. Went to work for a small newspaper up there, so journalism was kind of the background in, and I was a freelance journalist for a number of years. That pushed me into children's nonfiction because some of the stories I wrote seemed like they'd be interesting stories on a deeper level for younger readers. So if any of you are writers, writing novels is not the only way to be able to have a career as a writer. You can be a journalist, you can write nonfiction, and doing that, you get to do cool stuff. Like I got to fly with the Thunderbirds. I got to work with Robert Ballard putting remote operating vehicles down in the deep water trenches and watching data come back. I got to learn a lot about fly fishing. It's just it's a fun, interesting way to make a living because you get to meet cool people and you get to do cool stuff. So I'm building a career as a journalist, as a nonfiction writer. And then there's a poem in Crank that says, it started with a court-ordered summer visit. And so eventually my ex-husband was getting remarried. He had wanted nothing to do with his kids for 10 years. He was getting remarried, he wanted to be their dad again, so he took me to court, and the judge told me I had to send my kids to see their dad. And when Crystal went to see her dad, she was 150 IQ, straight A+ kid. Thought she was a geek, had never had a boy show interest in her. She goes to New Mexico, and all of a sudden she has a guy showing interest in her. He convinces her to try crystal meth, and on that 2-week summer visit to her dad's, her life changed. Her dreams were gone, and it happened that fast, and when I represent it in the book, that's very much the way it happened. So she comes back from her dad's, starts school, her grades are slipping immediately, she's going out the window at night, she's getting in trouble. So I look into her stuff, and I found crystal meth, which I had no clue what that was at the time. Learned very quickly what it was. Put her into outpatient rehab, had her in counseling, tried to get her to stop without lockdown rehab. But the thing about meth and meth addiction specifically is that the addict really needs to want to get clean. And she didn't, and she wouldn't have, except in her senior year. Well, she kind of got pregnant. So Crank ends with Hunter crying in the house and her deciding whether to go be his mom or to go back to the drug. And because we have a sequel, she chose the drug over her baby. Hunter is now 18 years old. He's graduating from high school, maybe, probably. We got this little history problem. We're working on that. He's a great kid with a huge heart and hair about down there because he's going to be a rock star. So he's playing death metal in my basement, and it's very loud. And I'm like, stop. Could you guys go practice at somebody else's house now, please? But great kid, and he's alternately the best part of every day and the worst part of every day, because he's 18, right? And he smells really bad. And you know how he fixes it? You guys ever heard of this stuff called Axe? So eventually, Glass ends with Christine in the book, Crystal in real life, pregnant with her second baby in jail on a trafficking charge. All the major plot points in those books, by the way, did happen. I changed characters around, there was stuff that I wasn't there to see that I fictionalized, whatever, but all those major plot points did happen. Later, she went to prison for fraud and ID theft and check kiting and things they were doing to support her habit. And when they sent my kid to prison, it was 6 years fighting that addiction with her, or trying to help her fight the addiction. When they sent her to prison, I needed to know what happened to my kid. So I started this book, never expecting it would publish, never expecting it would go on to become this huge thing that it has. I started it for me, to try to gain some understanding of those 6 years of my life and what had happened to them. And in writing the book, it became clear how many people's lives addiction touches. Maybe not that addiction, but some kind of addiction. I would guess in this room, every single person's life here has been touched by some kind of addiction somewhere in their life. And so, and the book here's how the book published. So, I kind of knew the business, I kind of knew children's publishing. So I went to a writer's conference and I sat down with an editor from Simon & Schuster. And I showed her a picture. I thought I was going to be a picture book writer, you guys. It is not my skill set, right? An entire story arc in 500 words. No, not happening here. But I showed her this picture book I wrote, and she goes, "This is beautiful, but I don't do picture books. Do you have anything else?" And I had 10 pages of crank with me, and I showed her that, and she goes, "Send that to me when it's done." 2 months later, I had 75 pages finished, and I emailed her and asked if she'd like an exclusive first look. She said yes. They sent me a contract to finish the book. Very unusual to publish a first novel like that, but she saw something in the power of the story, and of course the exceptional writing, that made them give me a chance, and that's how the book published. And then I've gone on to write about issues that touch you guys' lives every single day. And parents out there, this stuff is happening in your schools, okay? It's not stuff I'm making up to be scary or to be, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? I forget, it slipped my mind because I'm getting old, but I don't do it gratuitous, there's the word. I don't write to be gratuitous. These issues, teen suicide, sexual abuse, teen prostitution, these issues touch lives every day in every single high school in this country. Probably in the world, but I know for sure in this country. I visited a lot, I know. So I write these books because A, parents need some kind of understanding that this stuff is happening. B, people who are experiencing these things need to know they're not the only ones, and believe me, they do think they're the only ones. I hear that all the time. As adults, we go, well, of course you're not the only one. But when you're young and you're going through something, you think that it's only you that this is happening to. It's not. So that, or to offer insight into maybe you've lost a friend somewhere, or you've lost a parent. And now, like meth addiction specifically is jumping generations, right? It's not just parents that are losing kids to meth, it's kids that are losing their parents or have lost their parents to meth. And so these things are really important to understand and to bring some kind of insight to show young people that if you make a choice, Crystal made a choice, that we're now 20 years later, we're still fighting that addiction with her. In and out of that addiction. She can go three years clean, or she'll go 5 years clean, and then she'll meet another guy and right back down into it. And now, 18 months ago, we took custody of our 3 young grandchildren. So I am reparenting again. But it's science fair projects, you guys, really? Okay, I should be an expert by now, so maybe they should be getting easier for me, I don't know. But this is a choice she made at 16 and 17 years old that has affected all our lives, not just her life. She had her 7th baby while she was in jail with this last one. Only has the 7th baby with her. We have 4. The other 2 are with their aunts, their father's sisters. And so those kids' lives have all been affected by her choices. Her sister lost her best friend. Her brother lost his sister. And so when people, sometimes they'll take me to task for, you made a lot of money on her story. I'm like, wait a minute. This is my story too. And by the way, I wrote the book. Because Well, there is that part. You have to actually create something that people can and want to read. And the thing about it is, if she wanted to, if she would write a memoir or something, she could publish it so quickly. The problem is her brain won't let her do that anymore because she's lost little pieces of her brain to the drug. So that's where we are there. So choices. That's what I write about. I use the F word in the books, and obviously I use it in real life too. But as I said, in the aftermath of that big blow up, and I'm sure you guys all know about it, if a word offends you more than what is happening in the books, you got a problem. If writing... If a book that represents these issues upsets you more than the fact that this is actually happening, you've got a problem. Books are a safe space to explore these issues. Books are safe. They're very safe places. Parents, read the books with your kids and have the conversations with them, because communication is the key to any kind of relationship. And to have a good relationship with your young people who are looking for ways out all the time anyway, look for ways to keep them close. Don't push them away. Pull them in. That's what you want. And I know, because I wish I could have pulled Crystal in harder than I did, and I couldn't, and I lost her. So I got plenty of kids now, and I am pulling them in. And one of the kids has huge behavioral issues, meltdowns at school. I never knew what an IEP was, if you guys know what that is. I didn't know what that was until we had to deal with that, and we're dealing with it daily now. So the evaluation finally came back for him, PTSD, because of the things that were going on in his life. Again, her choices, his life, right? So parents, hang on to those kids. Kids, don't push your parents away too far, because they may look stupid, but maybe they are, but probably not as stupid as you think they are. And it's funny, one of the things Crystal said was, I didn't know how much my mom knew. And it's like, I was looking, I couldn't see everything, of course, but I was looking. So you have to keep your kids close. I don't know how to wrap this up, but I should wrap it up. Let me wrap it up with what I've got coming out this year, so you guys can look for it. I have 2 adult novels out now, a new adult novel out in July, my first novel in prose, because adult readers cannot wrap their minds around verse. I mean, they just can't. So all my YA readers that follow me up into adulthood, they like the verse. A lot of adult readers open up a book and go, oh, it's poetry. This book is called Love Lies Beneath. It's about falling in love with a sociopath, which I did that time. Do not recommend it. And then in November, we'll have out Traffic, which is the sequel to Tricks. And yes, all 5 characters are back. I listened to you guys, I did. I threw it out there, so who has to come back? And you didn't all agree, but somewhere along the line, all 5's names came back to me. So I'm like, okay, I guess all 5 still need to be there. Plus, you will learn a lot more about child sexual exploitation, trafficking children for sexual purposes in Traffic. And with Tricks and with Traffic, I spend a lot of time working with Vice, with judges, with people who work with survivors of it. And so the stories that you will hear in there, they are all based on real stories, I can tell you that. And then I'm writing now both another adult book and another YA for 2016. So that's what I'm doing now. And I guess I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Crutcher from here.
Thank you very much. Now please welcome Chris Crutcher.
And I'm even older than Ellen. This is Geezer Night at the Library. I like to follow a talk like that because the whole business of banning books is a strange thing to me. I was a high school kid in the early '60s. I was a college kid in the late '60s. I mean, this is hippie time, right? This is running naked through Golden Gate Park, smoking dope, and hippies. And one of the things that was so prevalent in the '60s was banning a book was evil. It just didn't happen. We thought we had taken care of this. So in 1982, when I started writing books and they started getting challenged and banned, I thought I'd fallen into some kind of a time warp. Now my dad was a conservative. My dad, in his time, he was a avowed conservative, and that's where I get most of the heat, where Ellen gets most of the heat. He was a World War II bomber pilot. By the time he was the same age I was when I graduated from college, he had flown 35 missions over Germany in a B-17, and he was the pilot. This guy was a patriot. He came back to Cascade, Idaho, where I grew up, a town of 943 people. High school, maybe 97. My high school graduating class was like 15. We had 10 boys and 5 girls. Except the boys in serious social retardation well into our 20s. Even the 5 girls didn't want to have anything to do with us. But my dad, if you were running for political office, from anything from dog catcher of Valley County, Idaho, to president of the United States, my old man was your campaign guy in Valley County, Idaho, and he was conservative. And he'd have run a nail through his eye before he let a book get banned on his watch. He thought he fought a war for that. And he was a believer in the separation of church and state for the good of the church and for the good of the state. They were two different things. They had two different purposes, and there was no reason in the world for them to get crossed over with each other. My dad was a conservative guy who believed that a woman ought to have the right to choose what happens to her body. All of the things that we consider to be, yeah, thank you. So I grew up hardwired for that. And the idea of banning books, the idea that we protect people by controlling what they think is crazy. Number one, you can't do it. And hooray that you can't do it. So in 1982, I sat down to write a book, and I'll tell you what, if I wrote this book, finished this book, got this book published, I would have published exactly the same number of books that I had read the whole time I was in high school. So I didn't think it was going to happen. But I was I graduated from Cascade High School, magna cum laude. And I went up to Eastern Washington State College because they would accept me. And I was a swimmer. And we had a great big locker room in the school where all the winter sport athletes dress for their workouts. And so the basketball team, swimming team, gymnasts, wrestlers, and all that, all dressing down in the same gym. And I'm over putting my swimming suit on, getting ready to go, and I hear the basketball guys over on the other side of the lockers, and they're talking about this legendary coach that was he was a small town coach in a small town in Eastern Washington, and every year there was an article about him in the Spokesman Review about what a magnificent man this was, and how he was the guy you wanted your son playing ball for. He was a basketball coach and a football coach, because this guy would make your son a man. Excuse me. He had the winningest percentage for small high school basketball and football in the whole state. The guy was a god. And I hear this guy telling this story over on the other side of the lockers. And he was telling this story. He was a freshman, and the year before he'd been a senior in the high school where this guy was the coach. And this was their year in basketball. They were going to go to state. They were going to win state. They'd been working for this forever. All these kids had been playing together since they were like 5th graders. And this was it. And another school in their league got a a new kid in school. New kid in school was a kid from actually down in Oakland, where I later taught or ran a dropout school. He was an African American kid, and he was a fabulous athlete. And he threatened to ruin their winning season. Coach takes the team into the locker room, locks the door, and said, "I've played against them. There's only one way to beat them. You got to hurt him. I want him out of that game before halftime." And the guy gets a shot at him. He's coming down the sideline right before half, dribbling the ball, looking for the shot, and kid takes him out. Looks like he's going for the ball, takes a shoulder into him, knocks him into the bleachers, ruptures a kidney. When he hits the bleachers, kid's out of the game, and these guys win the championship. And this kid's over there telling that story. Now, Eastern Washington is pretty white. There weren't any black ball players on the team. And I'm embarrassed to this day that I didn't go around there and tell him what a jerk I thought he was. But 20 years later, when I sit down to write my first book, that kid is still just burning in my gut. And so I start to tell the story. Now, I'm a fiction writer. It's a better football story, really, than it is a basketball story. So I make it a football team. I know small-town Washington. The difference between small-town Eastern Washington and small-town Lumbertown, Idaho, where I grew up, is trees. Everything else is the same. I don't know the coach. I just know this story. I don't know any of the kids from his town. It's called a little town called St. John. But I knew the kids from Cascade. So I start populating my story with the voices of kids I grew up with. And the coach, I don't, like I say, I don't know the coach, but I know my coach. Now, I don't think my coach was a racist, but I knew that coach's talk, Tell the girls they're going to have to wait till after the season. You guys, all that kind of stuff. So I create this story, and the coach has my coach's voice. But I'm not worried about that, because who's going to publish a book by Chris Crutcher, the guy who only read one book the whole time he was in high school? I'm just going to write this story, stick it in my drawer, and it'll be over. Except it gets published. The agent calls me, says he's going to represent it. Publisher calls me and says they want to do it. I'm thinking, wow, this is so great, so great. Oh my God, Mr. Bracky's going to read this book. I've got to get a hold of Mr. Bracky and tell him it ain't him. Mr. Bracky had biceps bigger than my head. Mr. Bracky used to play football with us, the coach. He used to play football with us, and he didn't wear pads. And when you hit him, if you didn't hit him hard enough, he made you get up and hit him again. He had no feeling on the outside of his body. As long as I had known him, I had never seen Mr. Bracky smile. So I write him a letter, and I say, "Dear Mr. Bracky, I just wrote a book. It's a fiction book. When you write fiction, you go all over the world for your characters. You take a little piece here and a little piece here and a little piece here and a little piece here. There's a coach in this book, and he might sound a little bit like you, but he's not you. He's not you. Oh God, please believe me, he's not you." And I mail the letter, because this is like back before there's any email. And I wait for the return letter, and it never comes. And I think, I don't really know that he could read. Actually, I do know that he could read, but that's just too good a line to pass up. So I think, well, my parents know what I look like. I'll just never go back home. Unfortunately, the book comes out, and it's doing pretty well. And I get a call from the Idaho Reading Association down in Boise, and they want me to come down and talk about this book I wrote. So I think, well, Cascade's on the way. I'll drive through at night and get down to Boise and do my talk, and then I can actually go visit my parents. I can go in under cover of night, leave under cover of night, never leave the house. Mr. Bracky will never know I was there. Except my mother died three blocks from the house she was born in Cascade, Idaho. She was the grand dame of Cascade, Idaho. And my mother, number one, everybody did what my mother said. So I'm coming back up, and I do come up in the evening, and she said, I took the liberty of calling the school, and you're going to go up and talk to the school tomorrow about your book. And I said, My mother was sure that her son, this great new author voice in America, would really want to go back up to his school and talk about his book, which was not true. And she was also positive that the school would want this great author that they spawned to come up and talk about his book, which was also not true. But you did not mess with my mother. I know how to do this. I'm going to go to the school early in the morning. Right before school starts, I'm going to sit out in the yard. It's springtime, so it's not cold. I still know a lot of kids that go there. I know the little brothers and stuff and people. I'll go out and I'll just hang out with them out in the lawn till the second bell rings. When the second bell rings, I'll run to the library. I know where the social studies room is. That's where Mr. Brackey is. I will not go by the social studies room. I'll get to the library. I'll be safe. I had not spent a lot of time in the library in my time there. So I run to the library, and the kids come in from English classes, and I start talking about the book a little bit, and then I ask for questions. Kid raises his hand, and he said, "Is that a real book?" I said, "Yeah, it's a real book." He says, the only book you're going to find with my name on it that isn't carved in there with a pocket knife. And he said, I like this kid, he said, "Yeah, but like if we were in New York, would that be a book?" I said, "It's a book. They put it together in New York. It's a book." Turns to the librarian and he said, "How many people from this school have written novels?" Librarian said, "Well, probably only Chris." He said, "How come this book isn't in the library?" She gets kind of red and she says, "Well, actually, you can get this book here at the school, but you have to check it out in the office and you have to get a note from your parents." Well, good chance you're going to get it from Mr. Brackey. Good luck. And I'm thinking, if my mother walks into your house and you don't have a copy of Running Loose on your coffee table, woe be unto you. There is one building in this school or in this town where you can't get my book, and it's the school. And I started to go back and kind of figure out, well, how in the world did I get banned in my own school? I mean, I had been banned as a human in my school on a regular basis, but not my book. And then I realized that this character takes on authority. And this character thinks for himself. And this character makes an enormous number of mistakes trying to do the right thing, because we are a trial and error species. And those errors we should embrace, and we often don't. And very often when censors go after something, it's because we want you to do as we tell you to do rather than to learn from your own experience, and that ain't going to happen. Well, to kind of round out the story, I now have to go to an English class. But I know how to do it now, right? I wait till the second bell rings from the library, circumvent the social studies class, go to English, talk about my book, go out the back door. Walk into the English room, walk in, close the door, and I'm walking down toward the front, and something doesn't feel right. And I turn around, and Mr. Brackey's no longer the social studies teacher. He's the English teacher. And he's standing up against the door like this, and I swear his biceps are twice as big as my head now because he's got them like this, and he's still not smiling. And I know that my life is probably terminal. So I go to the front and I say, to start off, I say, I know you guys know I went to school here. Mr. Brackey was my football coach. When you write fiction, you go all over the world for your characters. Little piece here, little piece here, little piece here. This coach might sound a little bit like Mr. Brackey, but he's not Mr. Brackey. He's not, oh God, please believe me, he's not Mr. Brackey. And then like an absolute idiot, I read the part of the story where the coach calls for the illegal hit on the ball player from the other team. I get finished. Any questions? Second mistake. Kid right in front raises his hand. I say, yeah. He says, sure sounds like Brackey to me. The last time I jumped out that window, I only sprained my ankle, but I'm older now. But I went back and I started looking at it, and I recognized, it's true. The language in any story I write is going to be realistic language, and it's realistic language because it rings true to me from my time then and my time now, and it rings true to you. You hear it all the time. I am not going to go to your school and teach you how to cuss. I go to your school to learn the new good words. read, I know where the bathroom is. So that's not going to happen. And again, and just like Ellen said, if those words offend you more than what's happening to the human beings out in the world that are using that language in terms to express his or her rage and that kind of thing, then you're in trouble. Because the things that we need to worry about are those things that we're afraid to talk about. When I was a therapist, and I worked for a lot of years as a therapist in the in the mental health world, working with families that were broken apart, families like Ellen was talking about. And I changed my idea of what a hero is by sitting in my office and listening to somebody finally get the courage to tell his or her story. And one of the things that I learned really, really early, and I would tell my clients this every time, and particularly to my adolescent clients, the inside of my office is the inside of your heart and the inside of your brain. I want to hear your story. I want to hear it in the language that you tell it in. I want to hear your story in its native tongue. You'll probably hear me using that language too, because I know exactly what it means. It is the expression of your rage. It is the expression of your disappointment. It is the expression of all this stuff. Words don't hurt people. Names do. Calling people names, bullying, that hurts. You know, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will break my heart. And that's the piece, that's the difference. But I'm going to write those stories about breaking your heart too. I'm going to write those same stories. Now, I've been working in the mental health business for about probably 8 or 9 years. And Running Loose was a story that I wrote right as I was entering into the mental health business after I'd been working in an alternative school. I was sitting in my office one day and I had a girl in there, and for some reason at the time, it was probably the late 80s, I had an inordinate number of teenage kids who had had some kind of sexual abuse in their lives. I had probably 5 or 6 girls and 2 or 3 boys. And though their situations were very, very different, the responses to that abuse were chillingly the same. And I was working with a play therapist at the same time. And her job, 90% of her job was working with 5 and unders who had been sexually mistreated. Now she was the best little kid therapist in town. But she worked 12 hours a day, 4 days a week, and 10 hours on the 5th day because the center closed. And she had a 6-month waiting list in a town of 250,000 people. And she was one play therapist. And then you start looking around at the number of times that kind of abuse is reported, and it ain't even close to 50%. And I think we are sitting in the middle of an epidemic that we're absolutely not willing to talk about. And it's killing us. And I think, God, I live in a culture that is afraid to talk about sex. How are they going to talk about sex abuse? So I'm in my office with this girl, and she was a brilliant kid. God, she was smart. And she had every manipulative skill there was to keep people away from what her real life was like. And I'd been with her for probably 7 or 8 months, and I was just starting to hear the story. And I'm sitting there listening to her, and I'm thinking, this girl's in a school someplace right here in town, and nobody in the school knows this story. There's no chance. She has one piece of control, and that's control of the secret. And she's not going to give that secret up in a place where she can get pummeled for it. So I hear the story, and I think, God, I gotta write this. Now, almost any author will tell you the story is everything. And most of us will say, well, I just want to tell the best story I can tell. Well, I did want to tell the best story I could tell, but it was something I thought people needed to talk about because I was blown away by this stuff. So I said, we talked about it. She knew I was an author, and she said, you should write this stuff. And I said, most of the things I write I have some experience in, and this one's a little far from me. And she said, I'm as good a reader as you'll ever run into. I'm your editor. And she had a friend who was also a client. So I had these 2 girls. I had the best editing I'd have ever had. And I said, I'll tell you what I got to trust you guys is if I write something that just couldn't be, I need to know it couldn't be because I cannot afford to make any mistakes with this. So I write the book, and it's a book called Chinese Handcuffs. And it's about a girl who was molested as a young kid by her biological dad when she's real small. And then that gets found out, and mom gets away from him. But then she marries this this really, really clever offender, and he's a lawyer. He knows his way. He knows his way through the system. You cannot get to this guy, and he's got her caught. And she has a little sister. She knows she could run, but if I run, my little sister's next. So I'm here I'm making the sacrifice. And I put her in a story with a guy who's gone through some pretty rough stuff himself. I mean, I am loading it up. Now, most of the time, I think this is my fourth book, and the first three books, have gotten pretty good reviews. I mean, you get a few shots at me and a few shots for using language and things like that, but generally speaking, good reviews. Boy, this book just got hammered. And it was 50-50. The people who liked this book loved it, and the people who didn't like this book hated me. And I thought, maybe there's some line I crossed, some line between reality and art that I just haven't paid very much attention to. I should kind of pay, is there something that I should have done? And I'm in Houston, Texas. And I'm in one of those Texas schools, top 3 grades, 4,500 kids. In Texas, they don't ever break up the school because it messes up the football team. I mean, this is a huge school, and I'm talking to an auditorium probably 1,100 kids, and I'm talking excuse me, a little about Chinese handcuffs. And afterwards, kids are coming down and we're signing books and McDonald's bags and foreheads, and I think I signed a government book. I'm leaving, right? This kid's going to get in trouble. And there's a girl right back here, and she's waiting. And she's waiting to talk to me, and I know I can feel her back there. And she's going to talk to me, and she's going to talk to me alone. And finally, everybody's gone, and she steps up and she said, I don't have any questions or anything, but I just wanted you to know that when I read Chinese Handcuffs, I thought you knew me. And she said, I'm standing here, and you are the first person I've ever told that that's my life. And she's really smart. She knows I'm a mandatory reporter. She's not going to tell me her name, none of that kind of stuff. She's just going to tell me, you made a connection with me. Well, I didn't make a connection with her. Those girls who read that book, who told me those stories, made a connection with her. And she said, this is the first time in my life that I ever knew anybody new. And she said, you can't believe what that does. Because that first piece, where you're not alone, is huge. So we talk a little bit about it, and I'm kind of trying to direct her someplace where she might get with somebody that can help her. And I'm getting ready to leave, and she said, she was pretty clever. She said, I read this, and she said, if some old guy from Washington knows it, there have to be some other people too. And I said, yeah, you're right. I said, she said, well, what do I do now? She said, I could be a client. You're a therapist, but you live in Washington, I live in Texas. And out of desperation, I said, who gave you the book? And she said, the high school librarian. I said, well, did she give it to everybody, or did she just give it to you? She said, I think she just gave it to me. I go with the high school librarian. 6 months later, maybe, she's graduated. She's 18, so she doesn't have to, she's an adult. I get a letter within 2 weeks, one from the librarian, one from her, and they've gone for help. I don't know how the story ends. A whole lot of things have to happen to make this work. You got to get a good therapist. You got to stick with it. There's a whole bunch of PTSD stuff that comes behind this. You got to hang in there. But it's a better chance, and it's a better chance because she picked up a story. It doesn't have to be one of mine. It can be Ellen's. It can be Walter Dean Myers. It can be Lori Hall Sanderson. Lori Hall Sanderson could fill this room with emails that have been sent to her that say, I didn't even know it was rape until I read your story. I didn't even know what happened to me. I thought it was my fault. And that changes everything. And what's really strange to me, well, not strange, but really perplexing, I guess, to me, is that thing that makes connections to the ruggedness of being a human being are the things that people try to ban. They try to ban the truth. They try to ban the truth because it's told in its native tongue. They try to ban the truth because it's told in a way that people can relate. One of the things about adults and adolescents, there's this huge thing about, the generation gap and all of that, and don't trust anybody over whatever age you choose. And believe me, whatever age that is, I'm older than that. We don't have to be this far apart. If you're an adolescent, you're in a part of your life where you're not supposed to be talking to us. You've been talking to us for a long time. We've been telling you stuff that didn't work for a long time. You talk with each other. You find your way. You come back and check out with us. And you come back and check out with us when you really need to. And if you trust us because we're willing to hear your life and we're willing to talk about your life, then we will be on that short list of people to come to turn to. If we don't, we won't. When I get into fights about censorship, that's the easiest job in the world. That fight is ridiculous. The fight about whether or not we should let people find their way, whether we should push for the freedom of expression, taking in expression and putting out expression, there's no argument there. What bothers me is that when I get into those talks, more really probably as a therapist than a writer, with parents to say, do you want to be one of the people that your kid turns to when they get into that place that you don't want to hear about? You got to figure out you do want to hear about it. And then what Ellen said is absolutely true. A book is safe. I can talk about the character. I don't have to talk about myself. I can find out what you think about that character. And then I can decide whether you're safe. I had a little kid tell me one time, I love this, and I'll close with it. And you can tell who the good teachers are, too, because they like the same books you like. You can tell who the good teachers are because they like the same characters you like. And that's how we make those connections. And that's the beauty. It's not just books, it's any kind of art. And we have to, as adults, get tough. And we have to, as kids, get brave. And push, telling the truth. And if you have to use a story to do it, it's the perfect way to do it. Thank you. I'm going to wrap it up there, and we're going to do some Q&A here, and you can. I don't know about Ellen, but I've never been asked a question I wasn't willing to answer. I don't always answer it truthfully, but I'm always willing to answer. So
we have members of the staff and the Big Read or the One Read committee who handed out paper and pencils. So if you have questions, if you'll pass those to the folks who are waving their hands at you, and they'll start collecting those. In the meantime, while we're collecting those questions, I'd like to start off with one that, being that you both are so frequently asked to not only speak with other writers to help them with that process, but speak with young adults, teens, children, and adults about having your books challenged. So I'd like to know, do you ever get tired of having to talk about your work and justify why you do it?
I don't know if I'm probably more efficient in talking about it than I used to be. Truly, when the first time Crank was challenged and I heard about it, I'm like, are you kidding me? Why would they not want this book? I'm like, are you kidding me? And so the first time it was hurt and a little bit of anger. I don't get angry. I kind of get angry when I get banned, but not so much when my books do. What I do is I have a file of reader letters that have come to me thanking me for turning them away from suicide, thanking me for helping them get the help they need, thanking me for giving them insight into a parent or friend or their addiction or whatever. So I have a file of those letters. If there's a book challenge and a librarian writes me about it, I send that file to them, and usually, almost always, that will make the challenge go away.
Yeah. I don't get tired. I don't get tired of talking about it, partly because every time I get to talk about it, it makes me feel smart because it seems like a really easy argument. It's like human beings, we yearn to be free, and the freedom in being a human being is freedom in the mind. So I don't have any problem with that because, like I say, it always makes, whether I'm smart or not, it makes me think I'm smart, which is an accusation that's been made against me by a number of people, starting with my parents. I never was hurt by it. I started writing late. I started writing when I was about 35, and I realized that there were people that I didn't want to agree with me. I realized there were people who had perspective that I would feel like I was cheating the world if they didn't disagree with me, because we don't see the world the same. And one of the reasons I write for young adults is because I have arrested adolescents all over the place. I can remember my high school days like they were yesterday, and my college days like they were yesterday. So I kind of like the fight. And I remember...
He remembers running naked through the park.
Which, if you have any brains in your head at all, that's a really ugly image for you, because it wasn't like I was lifting weights and running naked through the park. But I think it's a worthwhile argument. It's a worthwhile discussion, and I'll have it any time, because I so believe that I understand. I know the brain science. I know that if you're an adolescent, your brain isn't totally developed. That your emotional brain is ahead of your rational brain, but it's close. And it's almost there, and you're going to learn the rest by having experiences and learning from your mistakes. We are a trial and error species that refuses to embrace the errors, and those are the things that teach us. As an adult, I don't want to be there to stop you from making mistakes. I want to be there to help pick you up after you've made the mistake and maybe do something with that. So I like
it. This is for both authors. What is your view of humanity in its entirety? and you each
told me
get...
we had to do philosophy.
And you each get 3.5 minutes.
I think humanity starts as children, and it's all about discovery. It's about learning who we are, learning about what's important to us, learning about who we are, which is probably why I tend to write characters who are a little more diverse, or are off on the fringes, because we don't know who we are. As we get older, it takes a lot of trial and error to get through life, and it takes a long time to discover who we are personally. Then we have to figure out how who we are personally fits into who we are as a community or as a species. And that is, I don't think that we know that until probably, maybe not until we move on to the other side. I don't know, but without keep looking for how we are alike. See, we keep, instead of looking for why we're different, why I'm better than you, or why you're prettier than me, or why do we keep looking for what's different about us? What we need to seek out is actually what is the same about us as a species.
And she did that in the end of 3.5 minutes. As far as I'm concerned, it is, the trial and error thing is big for me. I think we are a trial and error species, and we learn from our errors. And the more we're willing to call those errors what they are, the more we're willing to tell the truth about what they are, and go ahead and accept the real tough stuff, the better chance we have of getting to that place where it's easier to tell the truth. Because the more we do that, the truth has a ring of truth to it, and we understand it. We hear it, and we connect when we hear it was from somebody else, even if they're very different than we are. And I don't think we're here anywhere close to long enough to getting it. But the more we're willing to make the connections, the more we're willing to look at that other person and see the commonness rather than the differences, the more we're willing to understand that loss is loss, that we've all suffered it, the more that we're willing to understand that shame is shame, the more that we're willing to understand that once we do that one thing that we wish we could stop and go step back over that sliver of time and make it not happen, we can't do it, because anything done is as safe in history as Julius Caesar. Once we understand that, and once we understand that there are ways to fix almost everything, you can't make it not happen, but you can put it back together again. You can get redemption, and sometimes it's hard to get. But life isn't long enough to fix it all. We just want to see how far we can get. And that's the trick. I've got this much time. How far can I get? How much can I connect?
I think the one thing that if we could get just one little thing that we could all get to, what every single person wants, every single person from little kids to old people, is to love and be loved. And that's pretty basic stuff. And if we can just get to that and look for that place within us and allow everybody to love and be loved, however that is, I think we're all going to be a lot better off.
And I can't let her have the last word, because I'm a guy. Actually, the truth is, it reminds me. Because for me, the word love is something it's hard to define. I mean, we define it in a whole bunch of different ways, and I look at it sometimes and I think, what's the result of it? And the result of feeling loved is empowerment. It's having somebody support me so that I feel like I have influence over what happens next in my life. And if I have influence over what happens next in my life, then I have influence over what happens when people come in my life. And if I feel empowered by the things I do because somebody cares about me and somebody gives me some unconditional regard, I can turn around that and make sure that anybody who passes through my life walks away with a little more empowerment than they had when they came in. And if they do that, then I've led a graceful life. So.
Do you have any advice for a young writer, and I think we might have several here because this was asked several times, trying to write a novel with a serious tone?
I mean, for me, character is everything. So, if you can start with character, and because that's another thing that I always get. So, what about writer's block? Or, what happens if you start with characters that interest you, and you can create multi-layered characters that aren't flat, that don't look like everybody else's characters, that have to do with you and the things that you know is what's going to make those characters stand out. It's what you know that goes into those characters that make them be special. So your characters shouldn't look like my characters. Start with character, build, at least that's my thing. I start with character, I build characters, and I let plot flow from character rather than trying to force characters into artificial plot lines, which is when I always get into trouble. Like I'll be going, no, you're supposed to be doing that. And they'll be like, hello, I would not do that.
I agree with that. Almost any editor will tell you that if the thing that will get your novel read is voice. And the voice, even if you're telling it in third person, but particularly if you're telling it in first person, that if that voice is compelling, they'll turn the page to see what happens. And voice is character. I mean, that's part of the deal. One of the things that I would say to all of you really talented young writers, take about 10 to 15 years before you actually write anything, because I've got about that much left. And I don't need the competition. And after that, read like crazy. Read the stuff, and read a lot of the stuff you like to write, because the good stuff and the bad, because you get the more you know how it works, what does work and what doesn't work, and write down everything that you feel intense about. If something makes you laugh, write it down. If something makes you so angry you can't see straight, write it down. If it makes you so sad you can barely walk, write it down, because there's where your characters are going to come from.
Also, be voyeurs. I mean, really, relentlessly people watch, seriously. Like, airports are the best for that, because people are stressed in airports. Wherever they're, so look and see what's making people mad. How do they deal with their kids or their spouses when they're angry or when they're happy? Or listen, overhear those conversations. So if you see me looking at you, you may be in a book someday.
And please don't watch me in the airport.
Will you each tell us a little bit more about what your newest books, yet unpublished, are going to be about?
Well, I told you about Traffic. So Traffic is out in November, and that really does. So all 5 characters are, at that point, have been pulled out of where they were at the end of the book, but there are going to be other people around them. The 2016 YA is about, it's called Chameleon. It's about a girl who was, I don't know, kind of spoilers. I better not do the whole spoiler thing. It's about a girl who's finally settled down in a place. Her father has had her traveling around the country for pretty much her entire life. She's finally settled down and she's happy where she's at. She's made friends. And then this big giant secret comes knocking at the door one day, and she discovers she's not who she thought she was the whole time.
Well, I actually have 2, because I wrote a book. It's 60 Shades of Gray, and 50 Shades of Black and Blue or something. I don't know. I had 2. And I wrote one book, and then I just had this kind of epiphany when in my sleep, I think, realizing that I had left a component out, and I had already started a second book. So I'm not sure which book will come out first, but I'll give you a little bit of the one that I did finish. It's a book called Some Guy, and it comes out of back in 1997. There was a school shooting in Moses Lake, Washington, and it was back before the Columbine shootings. And I wrote a book about that was kind of based on that. And I finished the book right at the same time the Columbine shootings happened. And I don't censor myself much, but I took this book out of the picture because I said, number one, I am not going to have a book out there that looks like it's an exploitation of the people in Littleton, Colorado's lives. And this book is never going to get a clean read. But I took a little bit of that book and I turned it into a short story quite a bit later. And one of the things that happened were the kids that were involved in that shooting in Moses Lake, I started getting some letters from some of them, and they were 8th graders at the time. And some of them were kids who had been stellar students, straight A students. They were in 8th grade and already figured out they were going to go to the University of Washington. They had plans, they had all this stuff. And they were writing me letters saying, I barely got my GED, I've been on drugs, I've tried to commit suicide 2 or 3. I mean, it was just the aftermath of that, of being in that room on the day when Barry Lukitis was going to kill us all. And I've been kind of an anti-gun guy for a long, long time because it just seems like you can talk about mental health, you can talk about all the things about school shootings or mall shootings or anything else. There's one common denominator. The common denominator is the gun. And I've been in mental health long enough to know you ain't going to figure out who the next guy's going to shoot is, but I'll tell you what he's going to do it with. So I watch this stuff and I'm totally stymied because nothing happens. I mean, the gun just become more and more and more available. And I grew up in Idaho. I mean, everybody had a gun. But then the Newtown shooting happens. And I think, now we've finally done it. We've killed a bunch of rich white kids. This is going to end it. And it doesn't end it. So I started a book, and it's a combination of the shootings. It happens in a mall in the state of Washington, out on the edge of Seattle. It's 12 years after the fact when I write this story. 12 years ago, the kindergartners and first graders are going to the opening of the mall, and it's Christmas, and Santa Claus is going to be there. And they go to the opening of the mall, and it's this beautiful new thing. It's just 3 stories high. And the kids are down there, and Santa Claus is coming, and they're lined up beyond sight. Parents and kids getting ready to see Santa Claus. And up on the 3rd story is a guy who wanted to be the real mall Santa Claus, but he only got to be the store Santa Claus in the shoe store, and he is off his nut. He walks into the store, kills one of the people in the store, and now he's got a line right down on the people standing in line, and he starts picking them off. Well, my main character, the female main character in the story, is a girl who was sitting on Santa's lap when the shooting started. And Santa Claus is the first person hit, and he falls forward, and he protects her. She feels 2 bullets go in, but they don't get to her. And her friends, everybody out there, I mean, people are running, you know how it goes. I mean, you know that everybody knows the story. Now, it's 12 years later, they're trying to graduate from school, and they have gone through the gauntlet. And they're trying to figure out ways to manage this thing that happened to them and to go on to the next thing. And I won't tell you how they did it, because if you go buy the book, I'll be rich. That's the next one.
What's the name of it?
It's called Some Guy.
You both choose to write about very touchy subjects that many authors would avoid. What triggers such bravery? I know.
I mean, I think there aren't enough authors willing to tackle the subjects. I think there are plenty of sparkly vampires and, after the apocalypse and whatever out there. And that's fine, and especially if you guys love to read that stuff, that's great. But I think we need more really good contemporary young adult fiction. And I would encourage you, if those of you who want to start writing for young adults, think about the contemporary angle. You know, it's kind of easy to go to the fantastical place instead of kind of really looking at these issues. And it's happening, you know, and if somebody doesn't write about it, then we forget about it. One of the things, I also have a book that is about childhood sexual abuse, and it's a father who was a district court judge, actually, and I don't close the door. I take you into the bedroom, and that book, of course, gets challenged a lot, but I had a reader write me, and she said, "Thank you for not closing the door. Because when you close the door, people assume nothing really happened behind the door."
Well, if I could figure out the very best vampire, zombie, werewolf book, I'd be out there writing it. But I tell you what, I cannot wrap my mind around that. I'll tell you what really makes me write about this stuff is the bravery of the people that I know that have gone through it. I've had clients that truly changed my idea of what a hero is. People who stood up under pressure that would have just buckled my knees. And I feel, to some degree, I have survivor's guilt. I mean, to some degree, I listen to these stories and I think, boy, there but for the grace of chance. There but for the grace of chance. It could be anybody. And it was pretty interesting to me when I started working in the world of mental health. I thought, when I started into it, I thought, man, this is crazy. I don't want to do this very long. This is mental health. You know, I don't have any of that. And I thought, well, I'll do it for a year and then I'll go on to, maybe I'll get this writing thing going, or maybe I'll be a rodeo clown. I don't know, but this is really tough stuff. But I started to get intrigued by it. And when I was in it for a couple of years, I thought, you know what? I've never had a client that wasn't like me in some way. And then I thought, you know what? There's no us and them. There's just us. And I could walk away from an encounter, a 1 year, 1.5 years, 3-year encounter, 2 sessions, connection with a client, and think, in truth, I got as much out of that as they did. And I've been lucky enough that I can probably take what I learned from them and infuse it into somebody else's life. And then when I found out that I could do it in story, I could take that kind of heroism that I never experienced and turn it into story. God, how can you not write that?
If you could change one thing about one of your books, what would it be and why?
Sales. I would increase them exponentially. I feel really lucky. Every book that I've written turned out to be the book I wanted it to be. I'm a better writer now than I was when I wrote my first book. So there are probably some things that I would change, from a voice style and things like that, things that I've learned. But I feel really blessed that every story I started to tell was the story that I wanted to tell. And like I say, when I look around, sales.
I agree that each book I'm a better writer. So I could go probably back and rewrite Crank today and it'd probably be a marginally better book. But it needed to be that book at that time, for me and for my readers. And so I don't think I would, and I'll just take this another step farther because people have asked me, so if you could change one thing about your life, what would it be? Sales, no. No, and I have to go back, and you guys heard kind of a brief little bit about, I've lived some pretty horrific years. I've lived very poor, where I really had to fight to feed my kids and stuff, but would I change anything? Everything that I've experienced has brought me to this place. So I can't even say that I would go back and change any of the bad, because otherwise I wouldn't be here.
I think if I could change one thing about my life, just for one day I could dump. Just for one day.
Thank you all very very much. We are going to take a short break, 2 to 3 minutes, so that we can escort Ellen and Chris to the main concourse to set up for book signings. If you will all please stay seated so that we can get to the hallway easily. Thank you very much.